With St. Patrick's Day coming up, I thought maybe it would be fun to take a look at a different kind of Irish chain block. This one is a 4-patch, and I'm going to make a 12-inch block, and also you'll see that this has some little 4-patch squares in it. And instead of cutting individual little squares, what I'm going to do is sew these together using a strip piecing method. Hi, this is Penny Hallgren from quiltblocklibrary.com and quiltblocklibrary.tv. Thanks for joining me, and if you're ready to get started sewing this Irish chain quilt block, let's go to the sewing machine. I'm always looking for ways to shortcut the way I sew quilt blocks together, and this is a perfect example of a shortcut method that you can use to make this piecing go a lot quicker. You may be able to see, and you'll definitely be able to see in your pattern, that there are a bunch of these little 4 patches. And instead of cutting out individual squares, I'm going to sew these pieces together, or these patches together, as strips. So what I've done is cut strips of the light and then the 2 different colors of green. And I'm simply going to place these strips right sides together and sew them together. Once they're sewn together, I'm going to press them open and put the seam allowances facing the solid color, and then I'll meet you over at the cutting table so that we can see how to cut these off so that you can do the next step in getting these patches together. Now I've got my 2 strip pieces sewn together, and you can see I've just got a light and a dark and a light and a dark, and I've pressed the seam allowances toward the darker fabric, and that'll make the patches go together quicker. So because my strips were 2 inches wide that I originally cut them, what I'm going to need to do is cut them across 2 inches so that they're 2 inches long too. Now I have my little piles of patches that I've cut off, and I'm going to carry these back to my sewing machine and sew them together into actual square 4 patches. Now looking at my pattern, I see that I've got to have the lights together and the darks together. So what I'm going to do is just pick up 2 of these light patches, and I'm going to put them right sides together. And these are going to fit nicely together. The seams are going to nestle in really nicely. And then I'll just be able to sew my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I'll have all of these little square 4 patches finished. These 4 patches are all finished, and before I open them up and spread them around on my flannel board, what I'm going to do is sew these half square triangles together that go in the corner. And they're pretty simple. I didn't use any shortcut methods to sew these. I'm just using half square triangles that I'm going to place right sides together and simply sew along the bias. Once I had all my half square triangles sewn together, I was ready to lay it out on my flannel board as I'm going to sew the whole block together. And I always like to take a last check just to be sure that everything is laid out the way I want it to be. So now it's time to sew the patches together. The first thing I'm going to do is sew this center unit together. So I'll sew the triangles on each side, and I'll sew the triangles on the sides opposite each other together first, and then I'll add the ones on the opposite sides. These 2 sides are sewn, and now I'm just going to add the second set of triangles onto the corners, and then we'll have a square in the center of this block. Now we've got the center part done here, and in order to sew this whole unit together, I'm going to need to sew these 2 patches and these 2 patches. So that's my next step. Now I'm ready to add these patches onto the center, so then I'll have my entire centerpiece done. Now I've got the center pieces sewn together, and I'm going to need to sew these rows together, so I'm just going to sew them pretty easily, just right sides together. Sew those patches together, and then I'll be ready to sew the rows together. I've got these pairs sewn together on the top and the bottom, so then I just need to sew the rest of the rows together, and we'll be ready to finish up the block. Just 2 more seams and this block is going to be done. So I'll start with sewing the top row on, and then I'll sew the bottom row on. I've got the top rows sewn on here, and now we're ready to put the bottom row on, and then this block will be finished. Our Irish chain quilt block is all finished and ready to be sewn into a quilt. This is an example of looking at a block and seeing how you might be able to shortcut and shorten the time that it takes for you to sew a block together by using some strip piecing techniques. Thanks for joining me. This is Penny Hallgren from quiltblocklibrary.com and quiltblocklibrary.tv. If you're not already there, head on over to quiltblocklibrary.com and get your free download of this pattern. Thanks again for joining me, and peaceful piecing.